Hello. Um, Good evening, and welcome to Chicago Booth's Faculty Fireside Chat in Seattle, celebrating Booth's 125th anniversary. Um, Booth is celebrating the significant milestone with events across the globe, including a record number of participants gathered in Chicago for the Reconnect weekend, for those who have been. Um, so really excited and welcome. A little bit about myself. I'm Gayatri. I graduated in class of 21, and pricing strategies was one of my favorite courses. Um, and No. And currently working at McKinsey as an associate. And I have the pleasure of leading the Booth Alumni Club of Seattle alongside other alumni volunteers, some of whom are here. We strive to build, grow, and sustain the Booth alumni community and raise awareness of Booth in the Seattle area. If you want to learn more about our upcoming events, you'll have cards placed on your seats. So please scan the QR code and then you can join our LinkedIn community. We have an upcoming event on June 28th. So hope to see many of you there. With that, I'll pass it over to Professor J.P. Dubé.
Pleasure to be back in Seattle. Haven't been here since before COVID, but I used to be here once or twice a month doing various things that I can't talk about on the record at Amazon. But tonight I have the great pleasure of introducing to our speaker for this evening, Sandy Stark.
Thank you.
Booth class of 95, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Terrific. And folks, I just want to make sure you know that this is an interactive session. It wouldn't be the University of Chicago if you didn't have questions or even points of disagreement. So please feel free to raise your hands throughout and ask as many questions as you like. So we're going to be here to sort of moderate things, but really this is meant to be a group effort. So Sandy, of course, has 20 years plus of experience at Starbucks. I have to admit that's something I'm really impressed to read because our current batch of students don't spend more than 2 years in a job anymore. And while I understand the enthusiasm of trying new things, there's really an ROI to just being deeply immersed in a company and doing exactly what you've done. I know you're now the Senior Vice President in Data Analytics and Business Insights, but there's just a long path that you'll tell us about shortly, I imagine. You'll tell us about how you get to that kind of leadership role. And I think that many of the rapid pace of the job market these days, you sort of miss out on some of that deep immersion. So of course you have a really fantastic history in the company. Again, I'll let you tell us about more in detail, but just so many different areas, including insights and innovation. And of course, prior to joining Starbucks, you were at McKinsey & Company as a consultant. You worked in Chicago and in London, if I'm correct. So you have some international experience as well. Well, why don't we kick things off? I'm going to ask you a career-related question, which is maybe you'd share with all of us sort of the career path and how it ended up taking with you now being in a leadership position in data and analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
It's great to see everybody. As you mentioned, JP, I was at University of Chicago. I was an engineer prior to that and had decided I wanted to kind of broaden my perspective and understanding of business, and so went to business school. Coming out of that, I wanted to actually go into investment banking. I did a summer of that and decided not for me.
You dodged a bullet, I'm sure.
So I ended up at McKinsey, and I ended up in Chicago for about 2 years, and then I moved over to London, and I spent about 7 years in the London office and traveled all over Europe. And I actually was really across a broad array of domains. I did industrial, I did insurance, and retail. When that kind of came to a point where I didn't want to travel so much and I wanted to settle down, I wanted to move back to the United States. I'll just tell a little story because it's kind of funny how I ended up at Starbucks. I flew out here for a wedding on Orcas Island and never had been to Seattle before, and I got a phone call while I was there for the weekend for the wedding, and it was a friend of a friend of a friend who said, heard you're back in the United States and there's this job at Starbucks, would you be interested in talking to us? And I said, my God, I'm in Seattle. So I'll be there, I'll come on Monday. And so I went and bought a suit. I still remember the suit was brown. And I don't know why I bought a brown suit, but I went in and I met with the team, and it was in this group called New Ventures, which was kind of like this entrepreneurial group. And I fell in love. And I fell in love with the company. I fell in love with the culture. I fell in love with the product. And I fell in love with the integrity and really the values of the company. And I never imagined, I mean, not in a million years did I think I would be at Starbucks for 20 years or anywhere for 20 years, to be honest. But it's because of the company. And I say that with there's a tremendous love for Starbucks and for what I do. So I think it's a really unique place. And I feel very lucky and honored to have ended up at Starbucks and to still be there after all this time. So at Starbucks, I did a bunch of things. I won't go through all of them because 20 years is a long time. I did start the Starbucks card and kind of moved that to a B2B situation and grew it tremendously. And I remember at the time, I spent every single week trying to prove that it was incremental and could not because I did not have the data. And so I just kept doing, well, what you would have to believe. And they just kept looking at the cost of the plastic and saying, well, it's, it costs money. And I managed to keep it alive, which was a tremendous success. And we now know, obviously, that the card business is highly incremental and has been kind of the basis of our loyalty program. I then ran Frappuccino for a while, which was super fun. And then I ran the food business for about 5-6 years. And when I took over food was a big moment for me because the food business was always a second-class citizen at Starbucks. Howard Schultz just never felt that our food lived up to our coffee. And in fact, Howard would have been happy if we had no food at all. There was a moment in time where he actually took all the breakfast sandwiches out, decided not to sell them because he felt like it smelled of cheese in our stores. It was a couple $100 million business. Just overnight it was gone. And so what I did is I took that business and looked at the profitability. I looked at the quality. We didn't own our recipes at the time. We worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of suppliers. And so basically I took that business, and in about a year, we took all the artificial ingredients out of our food. We consolidated our supply base. We took ownership of all of our recipes, and we relaunched the program. And that's kind of the foundation of the food business as you experience it today. We brought back breakfast sandwiches, obviously. But food has been one of the biggest growth drivers of our company over the last 5 years. And especially over COVID, we've seen so much attached in that business. So that was a real highlight for me, to be honest. I then went and ran the beverage business, and then I ran global innovation for product. And then eventually I had all of products. So I had all of our beverage, food, merchandise, coffee, everything we sell at Starbucks, and was responsible for the innovation of the product and the equipment that delivered that product from end to end, the assortment, pricing, all of that. So that was my first 19 years at Starbucks, and I probably would have been happy doing that forever. But the company decided that I was getting a little comfortable, and it was time for me to do something different. And so we started investigating what's next for Sandy. And when I took over the total business, it was about 2018. And at that time, I actually couldn't figure out if what I was doing was driving incrementality in the way that we needed it to drive the business. I didn't know which customers were buying my products. I mean, this was 2018, that's not that long ago. I actually didn't know what products I was sourcing from every time I launched something new. So that's when I formed this partnership with our data science group. And we set up a team that actually enabled us to gather the right information, gather the right data, do the right analysis to actually make very strategic decisions. We knew exactly, we had little levers we were pulling constantly on every single product that was in our assortment to understand how we continue to drive incrementality, margin, revenue, frequency, satisfaction, all of that across our customer base. So I just kind of fell in love with what our data science team was doing. And I said, well, how about if I take on that role? It was actually just happened to be open. So now I have a team called DIBO. It's data analytics, insights, and business operations. So I think the first part is kind of understandable. The business operations piece is a business operations team that focuses inward on DIBO, but also external across the whole enterprise. And we have just been through a reinvention over the last 2 years that my team has been leading. So kind of an enterprise PMO organization that has been driving transformation at Starbucks. And so I'm 1 year in. I am on the steepest learning curve you can possibly imagine. I can guarantee there are many people here who know much more about data science than I do. I'm not a programmer. But I have been learning and trying to figure out how I can help the company make better decisions every single day through the use of data. And so that's where I am right now.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, you're such a boothy. I mean, the fact that you ended up in data analytics because at some point you wanted some accountability for all the stuff you've been doing. I couldn't think of a better path towards the evidence
totally
part of the business and the science. And of course, the repeated use of the word innovation. I mean, I know that we all know that Starbucks is big and that Starbucks is dominant in the coffee industry, but we forget that that Starbucks transformed consumer culture. I mean, the 20th century was all about coffee taking second place to soft drinks, and Starbucks not only changed that trend and really single-handedly kick-started the rebirth of coffee, but you figured out a way to monetize it and charge people a price premium. Is it the variety, quality, and convenience? It was a good value proposition. But given in the theme of tonight, I know we're not interested just in hearing about the history of the marketing part of that. I think people really want to know more about the data and the analytics. Could you tell us a little more broadly what you know about how data analytics evolved at Starbucks as a company?
Sure. For a long time, we had no data science team, as I would assume many companies that you guys work for. And I would say we were even late to the party. We kind of had a very distributed model of data scientists, data analytics out in little pockets within the organization. Doing analysis that was good and useful and was helping us make decisions, but it wasn't consistent. And I would say that the data was also not consistent and possibly not accurate. It came from different sources. So you had the problem constantly of getting two different answers to the same question. We started getting a lot more serious, I would say, about 10 years ago. And really, it was primarily in the area of customer analytics and our personalization engine. And that's where we focused for a number of years. But then we started seeing the value of that, and we started broadening. And so I talked about product, where just the standing up of an organization that focused on product drove unbelievable value to the company. And then we started seeing that across the organization. The thing that happened over the last couple of years is we started centralizing it. And so now we really are a center of excellence. I have almost all the data scientists in the company, not all of them. There still are little pockets out there. In fact, we don't have pricing, which is a whole team of data scientists that sits within product, but I think that makes sense. But for the most part, we have established a center of excellence. We have organized by domains. So I actually have people aligned to product. I have people aligned to supply chain, to customer. And they know that business as well as the people who sit in that organization. And they are at the table, highly integrated. We have a high customer focus mentality where we are there to serve our customers. But we're also there to help drive their thinking and improve their thinking. And so that's the model that we're in right now. And it's, I would say, working incredibly effectively and efficiently. So.
Raised one point which I think sometimes flies under the radar for a lot of companies wanting to do analytics, and that was this point that you get data from different sources and you get these inconsistencies. And I remember, I think this was one of the transformative moments for Amazon, was when Jeff Bezos just said everyone's putting their data onto the API. We're going to have a central data repository. Everyone has the same set of protocols. And that standardization was what allowed Amazon to become a very automated and very science-driven firm, in contrast with a lot of the retail competitors and other platforms out there in the traditional bricks and mortar. So I love hearing that was an early stage of Starbucks as well. I'm going to jump right into something a little more on the technical side. Given that we're talking about data science in today's era, I'm going to jump right into machine learning. I'm not going to use the word ChatGPT or AI at this moment, because a lot of definitions and a lot of agreement on what those things mean. So let's just get into what we're really doing in most of the time, which is using predictive engines. And I was hoping maybe you could share with us some use cases on ML and thinking about what kind of processes that have been benefiting from L in terms of what you're able to predict and how quickly you're able to respond to those predictions?
Yeah. So at lunch, we were actually talking about this, where everybody says AI, ML, and really what we have is ML. And we are looking at, I'll say it, ChatGPT or generative AI. But right now we have about 50 active ML models across the domains. And I can just give a couple of examples of some of them. So about 2 years ago, we're trying to use these obviously to make us more efficient, right? And make better business decisions and improve the experience of our customers and also the people who work in our stores, which is a incredibly important thing for us to do. High correlation between highly engaged employees and how well Starbucks does. And so one of the things we looked at is, where are they spending non-productive time? And how could we actually use ML to make it more efficient? And so one of the things our store managers were doing, we have 10,000 stores in the United States. We had 10,000 store managers sitting down every single week and placing food orders. And they had recommendations, but they were overriding 80% of them because they didn't trust it, because they didn't get the right amount of food. They would run out, or they had too much and waste. And they were spending about 8 to 10 hours a week on this. And if you do the math, it's a lot of money that we were spending on that. And it actually wasn't very good. And it was highly unsatisfying for our store managers. So our team worked closely with our global supply chain team and developed an automated ordering ML program that actually has taken that responsibility off the backs of our store managers. So they no longer have to actually enter anything at all. They do have to do a light touch count, which takes about 45 minutes. So we're talking 8 hours versus 45 minutes a week. The accuracy has gone way up. Our waste has gone down. And actually, it's even done more than that, because now our predictability through the supply chain all the way to our suppliers has increased. And they have more reliability, so that they actually know how much food they need to make and deliver to our warehouses to get to our stores. So all of that has just been this virtual cycle. So what's fed into there is sales data for the past 3 years, but then on top of that, we add things such as possible weather patterns, or marketing events, or if you're in Seattle and you're near the Symphony, we add those type of events into there. And we also feed in supply chain disruptions, constraints from the supply chain, and all of that generates 1,500 different scenarios for each SKU, for each store, and they optimize it based on margin. So it's not optimized based on sales, it's not optimized based on waste, it's optimized based on overall product margin, and that's the scenario we pick. And so, like I said, it's been just a tremendous win across the board for our store partners. So that's one example.
That's terrific. I saw a hand up. I just want to make sure I didn't miss the question, please.
It was,
What do you want? Sorry, say your name too.
Nabila Alidina from
Nabila.
Stock 2016.
Thank you.
So it was a question right before this one. How did you convince the leadership team at Starbucks to give you this data science role with no data science background?
It's a great question. Well, I do have a analytical background. So I did have a undergraduate statistics and advanced mathematics degrees. And at Starbucks, another reason why I actually really do value and love Starbucks as a company is that they take people, they move them around, and if you're at a senior level and you're being moved around, you ultimately are going to land somewhere where you don't have a tremendous amount of experience. And they support you so you can quickly get up to speed. But the value is placed on being able to connect the dots for the team. So I do understand the business. So 20 years, I understand supply chain, I understand innovation, I understand marketing. And I can help them connect dots on how we can actually help the business. And now my job is to learn as much as I possibly can on data science, data engineering, insights, and all of that. So I didn't really convince them. It was a joint decision, and I think they trusted and valued me as a leader at the company.
Just a small follow-up. And how are you learning that? Are you in talk meetings trying to learn it? Are you learning through like external sources? How are you ramping up in your data science?
So I am all of the above. So I sit with the team. I am taking classes, online classes that my team has helped kind of point me towards. We have an internal training program that we put our data scientists through. I'm sitting in those classes with them. I ask a lot of questions, and I ask for forgiveness. And I read as much as I possibly can. I talk to other people in the industry. I just joined an industry group called Analytics 50, which is a wonderful group of professional peers that we connect with. And we constantly connect, and we put questions out there, and people answer them. They have talks every single week that I try to attend. So I just try to just immerse myself as much as I possibly can. I'm very okay saying I don't know. I'm not a programmer. I'm not actually going to look at people's code. I'm not going to evaluate it. So I have to put in place a team that I trust, and I do. I have a leadership team that I trust, and I have to trust the other members of my team, and learn as much as I can. So that's a great question, though. Thank you.
This stems nicely with how we think about business education now and how deeply someone needs to be steeped in data science to lead a group of data scientists. It's a big question. Do you need to have a computer science master's degree, or is it sufficient to understand the business uses and then just be good at building good teams like you've done? I saw some other hands up. I want to make sure to miss. Yes, please. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Sandy.
Hi.
My name is Archie. So, that use case is super interesting. I have a technical question, kind of. So the data that you're getting back from all your stores, how do you make sure that that data is fresh enough for you to run the optimizations on to get an answer in time for what the stores should be doing?
So a lot of that data is real-time data. So the POS data is real-time data that's fed in from a data exchange, and it's constantly being updated. We do have some data, obviously, that's not real-time, and so therefore we have to make sure that everything's set up within our data lake in ways that we can connect the right data to the different data sets. So it's interesting. One of the things that's been a big unlock for us, besides having this data lake, data environment where all of our data goes, is also making sure that it's organized in a way in which the data scientists know how to access it. They're accessing the right subsets of it, and that we have the definitions defined across the board. So that's where we're actually spending a lot of our time right now, is defining metrics. Because if you think about, and I'm kind of getting off the topic here, but even like something as simple as margin. There's so many different ways to define margin, and so we just have to make sure that we have these consistent definitions that my team is really working on putting in place. But we do have real-time data. We make sure that we have the right definitions that we're using to actually feed into the AO automated ordering model to make sure that we're getting the right results.
I saw another hand up here in the midway through.
My name's Trisha. I'm actually a new partner at Starbucks.
Oh.
Yeah, so very excited
Hi.
to hear you talk. I'm in the retail core beverage team.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. I was curious from a change management perspective, if you could just talk through, how did you get the organization to kind of be more data driven and get Daibo to have like a larger seat at the table?
So I can't take all the credit because I've only been in this role for a year, and so the previous leader actually did a tremendous amount to, I think, set the stage for us. But what we do now is I talked about how we're organized by domains, and we have these partnerships and relationships with the different teams, and we're sitting at the table and we're adding value. There was a period of time actually where the organization was kind of more of a think tank and had to be like the smartest guy in the room type syndrome, and often wasn't providing information that was useful or usable or didn't have the context. I remember they used to bring things to me in product, and it was nonsense. The data was showing something like, I don't know, something silly like caramel. People don't like caramel anymore. And, I'm just making this up. It was something ridiculous like that. They told me something ridiculous like that, and I just said, well, that just can't be right. I don't know I don't know where you're getting the data from. I don't know what data. I don't know how you got that analysis, but it's not useful to me as a business owner. So I don't want us doing analysis that nobody's asked for, nobody knows what to do with, is contradictory to what their understanding is, and doesn't have the context of what the business has. So we are very careful to make sure that all of that is in place, and we work really hard at maintaining those relationships. I also have top-to-tops constantly with the other leaders to understand what's some of the problems that they're focused on, where do they see issues coming up, and how can we help, so that I actually understand way in advance of information that they need or data that they need.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that, since we're on the topic of customer insights that don't make sense or aren't helpful. I'm going to go back to machine learning, which was where our thread was a little earlier, and maybe ask if you could share with us some of the limitations and risks you see as businesses start to become more automated and more reliant on algorithms instead of human beings. If you see some problems with that right now.
Yeah, I think we're probably all reading about some of the risks associated with generative AI, but I would say AI, ML in any case is, depending on where the data is coming from, you can have bad data, you can have misinformation that's out there that the models are running on. You certainly can have hallucinations, depending on what kind of models you're using. And some of this generative AI was actually set up to be like a human and talk like a human and write like a human, not to be necessarily accurate. And so there can be accuracy problems that exist. So
Do you have an example you could share with us on that?
Do you have an example? Let me think.
More on bias than on accuracy.
Oh, bias.
Bias is like one of the ones that we worry about the most. And if we're letting the current environment and the current data train our algorithms, and our current data or current environment is wrought with bias, then we could have algorithms that are just going to learn to be biased. We see this, for example, Uber and Lyft. A study in 2019 found that Uber and Lyft were charging much higher prices in poor neighborhoods, especially poor neighborhoods with predominantly ethnic minority population. Why was that? Because it turns out that historically people in those neighborhoods were less price sensitive. Turns out that exposed because there was no taxis going to these neighborhoods. And so of course people had very few competitive options other than Uber or Lyft, which meant the algorithms just automatically charge higher prices for rides to those zip codes, which is obviously not something that either Uber or Lyft deliberately intended, nor did they want that to be part of their PR. So this is like an example where the data trained the algorithm to be biased, even though it wasn't a deliberate.
Yeah. I think, I've also read about some of the resume screening and just the deep-seated biases that have existed for decades. And it's kind of hard to get to even understand if it's being biased because it's so deep-seated. But I've seen it, where, we've been playing around and you ask, like a beverage recommender and, it's just sometimes the information that comes back is just wrong. So we have a whole group that's looking at how we can explore in this space in a really safe, non-biased way that protects our information and delivers accurate results and results that feel like Starbucks. So for instance, if you're using some sort of generative AI and you're having a response that's actually talking to your customers or talking to your partners, it has to be with the tone that Starbucks has with our customers and our partners, which is empathetic, which is kind and understanding. And so all of that is very, we're so early on in understanding how to actually protect yourself 100%, which in some cases, if it's customer facing, you do need to do. And so right now, we don't see a scenario where there's not a human intervention, a human lens over all of this. And so we're working hard on what the governance structure is, how we're going to participate in this space.
Yes, please.
At what point do you bring in primary research direct from customers, or at what point do you bring in primary research, so questions to customers or partners, where you ask them why or confirm what you're seeing?
We do that with absolutely everything we do. So we have a whole insights team that works with consumers and our partners in our stores, and we're asking. We actually have a regular measuring system that asks the employees in our store are called our partners. So sorry if I haven't explained that. We do a daily pulse with our partners to understand sentiment. We do a bi-yearly, much broader engagement survey with them. We do the same thing with our customers on a daily basis. For all of our product development, we do deep customer research for all of our marketing material. So it's embedded in the whole process of almost everything that we do.
Question in the second row.
I'd like to follow up your comment with sort of a devil's advocate question. You spoke about the struggle to create DIBO, centralized data analysis, and I think that occurs, at a certain point in every corporation's maturation, where data analysis arises, in independent pockets and is very effective, and then leadership says we need to harness everything and synchronize everything, and there's this incredible thirst for one truth. You mentioned the different ways to define margin. My question is, what is the price paid when you centralize data and you take it away from these little pockets that resist giving up their data and their analysis? And when you make the data compatible, synchronized, normalized, is there anything given up? Do you have any opinions about how to manage that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. And I am under the firm belief that there is no one correct organizational structure. And so there's always trade-offs. And I think it does depend on the kind of the maturation stage that a company's in, as to what makes the most sense. I also think that there's ways that we can empower the organization to be able to use data, but the data is still centralized and maintained by one organization. And so we're working really hard on self-service tools for the organization so that they can actually source the data themselves, do analysis themselves, have dashboards so that they can look at information on a regular basis. So I think that's kind of our next evolution, is to enable our organization to use the data, but still control the data and make sure that we're maintaining the quality of the data. I think it's more efficient to be centralized, to be quite honest. What I saw when we actually pulled the resources into one central organization is a increase in productivity, better use of the resources, certainly career pathing, training, talent development. All of that has been improved by having a center of excellence. But then I think we need to do this next step, which is to enable the organization to control it a little bit.
Bunch of questions here. Another one in the third row, second row.
Hey, Sandy.
Hi.
Great to have you. 25 years, congratulations. I just left Microsoft after 30 years, so I know what you mean. The one question on the ML example that you used earlier on the POS and the replenishment, and how far you have gone on the financial forecasting. Are you using ML to basically prepare the earning release?
So we have something that's called the DIBO forecast. It's not the only forecast, but it's more of a real-time forecast that we check and adjust against, especially as we schedule labor into our schedule staffing in our stores, because the financial forecast is done, on a quarterly basis, basically. But things happen, as you know, right? Like every single day, things are happening in markets, in the United States, in the supply chain, everything. So we actually have a forecast that is done by DIBO. It's an ML forecast that is a 3-week forecast that we kind of check and adjust against and use it to actually make real-time business decisions that are more accurate because we're closer to the time frame. The other thing that we're looking at in terms of forecasting is we are getting involved in developing the pro formas for new stores. And that used to be done by our field teams, our real estate field teams. And they would determine what the pro forma for a store is. And they, tons of knowledge, but had a tendency to forecast on the high end. Very optimistic group. And so we now have another pro forma that's developed so that we can kind of start matching and checking. So right now what I would say is that we're using them as a way of checking and adjusting with more kind of close-in real-time data.
Right here in the front row. Yeah.
I'm Kathleen. GSB 84. Campus. I'll get used to the booth thing someday. I come from healthcare, and we've used a lot of clinical data. We call it decision support, but I love the way it's being worked through and really built in industry. My question is, when are you going to bring the numbers, the finance numbers in, and have that same consistent way, the forecast you're doing, the budget? Microsoft is, I'm sorry, no, I can't, I don't have my glass. Bye. Well, doing the forecast for earnings, are the financial numbers any different than what drives the business? Shouldn't they all be the same? And have you guys started thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about how you start reconciling all of the forecasts. I mean, there's more than two forecasts. There's many forecasts, and I think we will move to a place where there's less, and we will start relying more on our DIBO forecast. But and perhaps perhaps you move all the way. I think that they both.
Data's data.
It is. And they serve different purposes right now. So right now, I see the need for both. But we've talked about it. We have talked about
I
it.
say you go, Sandy. I like having a girl at the table.
I'll let you know when it happens.
We have
Thanks.
a question in the very last row.
I just had a quick question back to the algorithm conversation. And, algorithms are a little bit like a black box. When you build an algorithm, you don't really know what it's doing on the inside fully. And I'm just wondering, a good example would be things like YouTube or Google News, where it's interacting with people and it's feeding back sometimes confirmation bias, for example, to the end user. And so I'm just wondering sort of what you all are doing to re-look at your algorithms over time to make sure that it's not going astray and feeding you bad data at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that obviously it's our data that's being used, but we are constantly, there are metrics that we use across the board that constantly monitor how these programs are performing. So for instance, on the automated ordering, we're constantly looking at the overall margin that we're achieving on food. And if we start to see that going in the wrong direction, one of the things we look at is the automated ordering program. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things that we would flag and we would assess. And we have found in situations where we have to go back in and maybe maybe we're not looking at all the right inputs into the model. Maybe we didn't consider something. So the teams are constantly going back in and evaluating the performance of the model versus metrics, key metrics, and checking and adjusting.
So it seems like a lot of these examples are internal decisions, which makes the the question I'm about to ask a little bit unrelated to those examples. But the real demand of transparency is the privacy regulation we're starting to see emerge probably faster in Europe than we are in North America, is going to start requiring firms to be transparent, at least when you're using your point of sale data and possibly loyalty card, like your app, for example, your app data, individual customer data. And I guess this is what I was thinking was part of where your question might have been going, was what do we do as our algorithms are getting more sophisticated, especially as we start relying on reinforcement and learning adversarial type algorithms. What are the worries or risks we have when we literally can't dissect where a recommendation or where content that was created, where it came from?
Yeah, I mean, privacy is a major focus for us, especially as you think about our loyalty program, our customer data. And I mean, obviously there's rules and regulations which we fully comply with, but the thing is they're always changing. And, there's like California is one state that is constantly ahead of, maybe not as far as Europe, but it's ahead of the rest of the states. So, we have a whole privacy group that focuses on what the changing landscape is and where Starbucks needs to go. But for us, we take it incredibly seriously that our customer data is incredibly secure, and unless you've opted in, we don't share that data. So I think it's just staying up with where the landscape's going. I think our group often looks at what's going on over in Europe so that we can actually start planning for some of those scenarios.
I know there's a gentleman in the third row here at the front who has his hand up. Oh, right up here, yep.
Hi, Ryan, Capital XP88. So I want to push back a little bit on something you said earlier on we don't create analysis that wasn't asked for. And while I agree that unfocused analysis, particular context-free, can create spurious associations, I think there's a challenge on the other end where you're specifically just answering business and operational questions where you get asker bias and you hunt for answers that are specifically asked for. So I think there's a space where a scientist can be exploratory and find counterintuitive but true associations in the data. So I'm curious, how do you balance that analyst answering the operational and the business and the principles question, but simultaneously letting your scientists be scientists and try to like really explore and really find things that are transformative.
Yeah, thank you. I love that you push back on that. That's difficult, and what I've seen is I saw it swing too far one way. We've kind of swung back the other way. The one thing that I have tried to do in order to make sure that we're not just answering a specific question is we have a lot of conversations about what the objective is. Not what the directive is, but what the objective is. And if my team can understand the objective, we often come back with things that nobody even thought of, right? So they do have they have a latitude within the objective. So what I try to avoid is a very specific. Sometimes specific is great, and it makes a lot of sense. But sometimes when we're both like just kind of brainstorming, early stage, we don't really know what we're going to find. We really set the objective, and that gives the team a much bigger box to play in. So often we come back with things that, I think kind of push the thinking. I've seen it many times.
But part of that question is going to be related to method. I mean, machine learning, most of it really wasn't designed for causal inference. It was designed for prediction. So almost mechanically, you're going to find lots of spurious associations, and who cares if something's good at predicting something else, and that's our goal, then we should run with it. But we shouldn't be thinking of machine learning in general as a tool to uncover mechanisms and understanding what causes what.
Yeah, and I would say that often what I'm talking about, sometimes it's not machine learning, but just general analysis, some insights, and letting my whole team kind of have a bigger sandbox to play in.
Absolutely. Yes, question in the back?
Thank you for sharing all your insights. This is Jessie Shao, 2023 EMBA graduates. I just wonder, startup definitely is one of the very successful retail business globally. But how you guys predict the retail clients' behavior or their anticipating of their price, their demand? We are talking about millions of retailers globally. Just wonder what is some insights you can share. Do you, for instance, apart from the historical trending, obviously, do you also try to anticipate their Starbucks share of their wallet, etc.?
Oh yeah, for sure. We look at competitors. We look at flavor trends. We look at product trends. We look at what's going on over in some of the really innovative spaces like Japan is doing. Japan is always way ahead of us on flavor development, inclusions, things like that. We look at trends in terms of how people are shopping, where they're shopping, how they're buying, and so we look at general consumer trends, but also just trends that let us know which direction consumers are going in general. We've also, we've had a check and adjust. One of the things that has really changed Starbucks was COVID and how people interacted with retail in general, and so things actually came out of that we never would have predicted. So sometimes you actually you can't predict it. So people come at different day parts now. People are using mobile order and pay much more than using just going up to the register. Drive-through increased dramatically during COVID and never decreased. And just what they're buying, and what they're buying together. So they're buying joint orders, and delivery popped up out of that. So sometimes you can see trends, and sometimes shifts happen in the marketplace, and you have to just check and adjust very quickly to meet those shifts.
Thank you.
One more question? Sure.
Hi, Leah Lansbury, Austin, 2013. How how do you push back against maybe Wall Street, who's looking for these easy data analytic answers of, oh, hey, this is the trend. I'm going to go this way. This is the way to reduce costs, when maybe it's not actually the strategic long-term path. It's not going to take you where you ultimately want to be. But this is a nice data-backed up answer. It's going to make things good in the short term, but you can't prove that it might actually harm things in the long term.
So I don't really think that we're pressured in that way by Wall Street. I mean, we have a long history of delivering, and we set our strategy, and we have plans in place to deliver that. That's not something that is pressured by Wall Street. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
I think it's more related to with the new machine learning and AI, how people are really latching onto it and maybe attributing a little bit more relevance or meaning to it and discounting maybe more of the human scientists.
Well, so I'll tell you where, it's not Wall Street. So that's internal pressure. So, everybody is talking about ChatGPT. It's like the greatest thing, since sliced bread. And like, when are we going to use this? And how are we going to use this? And we have over 200 use cases that have been passed to us as possible uses of ChatGPT. And to me, we've had a lot of discussions about this, but to me, that's not the first place to go. The first place to go is, what are you trying to accomplish? What problem are you trying to solve? And then what's the right method for solving that? If it happens to be generative AI, then that's great. But my pushback is, I'm not starting there. I'm starting with, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? What are our priorities? And then let's figure out the right way to solve it. And then obviously, if we're going to use generative AI, we have to make sure that we have the guardrails in place to make sure that we do it in the right way. But there is this pressure to use, come up with, real-time examples of us using generative AI, when it might not be the right solution. You just might need an ML model, or, so that's kind of what I've been dealing with. It'll go away, it'll calm down, but right now it's just like, I'm kind of just trying to do the old Heisman, keep them away for a while.
Oh, great. If you need a Wes Anderson Starbucks commercial, you can go to ChatGPT then.
That's right.
That's wonderful. Well, listen, folks, I think we've reached the end of our time limit for this part of the evening's activities. So, Sandy, thank you so much for speaking so candidly with us. So really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.